Hey everyone, and welcome to my Procreate 4 demo for the piece I call Experiments. Now, before we actually get into it, let's talk about something some of you have asked about, which is my circle trick. I've talked about this before, and I said that I would show it in the future, so let's go ahead and jump into it. It's fairly simple, but I think that it's just one of those things where it's like, maybe if you aren't already thinking about it, this will make you go, oh right, totally. So I take the hard brush, which is just a hard circle, hard-edged circle, and so we've already got a circle there. You can see this is the way the circle brush usually behaves. It just has a bit of an opacity fall off based on pen pressure. So we're just going to use it to dot a single dot onto the screen, which you'll see right there. Boom, and that's it. Now I'm just zooming in here naturally in the program. So now we're going to duplicate that layer. You can see this in the top right where I've got my layers open. So now we have a black circle on top of a black circle, and then we're going to go to the little wand menu, the adjustments menu, and we're going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness. Now with this, we can take brightness on the bottom and we can crank that thing all the way up to white. This is really just so that you can see it. There's no point. You can make this any color you want it to be. But now we're going to go back to that layer and we're going to start adjusting it. So we go to transform and we shrink it just a little bit. And now we have what looks like a ring. It's not a ring yet, it's a white circle on top of a black circle, but once we confirm this, we will actually have something that we can use to punch a hole out of the other circle. So you see here in the top, we've got white layer, we've got black layer, just to show that this is opaque. Let's throw some color back there. So now you can see it's a white circle on top of a black circle. Now we will tap on the thumbnail for that white circle, we select it, and then we go back to the black circle and we say clear. You can see right there, it just basically takes exactly where the white circle is and punches that out of the black circle. So now we have a clean line. Now if you'll notice, it is a little thinner on top and a little thicker on the bottom. I wasn't really paying attention to how I was going to do it for this. I might do it thinner and thicker for some reasons, but you can see here now you can take that circle and you can warp it into whatever ellipses you may or may not need. Now, this is also a very, very clean version, so I'll show you what I do sometimes to rough it up or to make it look a little bit more natural when I'm working in Procreate. So now we'll go to that layer and we'll select that layer. So now we're just selecting the lines there. You can see with the way the selection is displayed there. I'll switch back to my fat pencil, and then on a new layer, I'll actually make the fat pencil relatively large. Right there, and I'll just go around it and I'll basically make it, I'll fill it in with sort of a textured rough pencil looking thing. Now we remove the selection and there you go, it's a messy looking pencil-y thing. It's one of those situations where you might want to make something look a little bit crappier just to make it look like it's a little bit more hand done. A lot of the time what I'll do, which I'll show right here, I'll actually take that and I'll duplicate it and I'll warp it into whatever I need for a something that would be best built with ellipses. And then after I sort of plot it all out that way, I will then draw, I'll use that as my guide and I'll draw over that on a brand new layer. This here is just an example of that, maybe making a button or something, some sort of a chip or coin. It's basically just a super short cylinder. So now I'll merge those two together. You see I've got that all there. It's built with ellipses and just a couple of straight lines. Lower the opacity on it, and then we'll go ahead and really quickly trace over that to try and give it a look that looks like it's, you know, it's a rough sketch then underneath. In this case, instead of the sketch underneath being really rough, the sketch underneath is a little too precise, and we're trying to hand draw it up, hand craft it up a bit. Now this is one of the most simplistic examples of what you can do with this, but I'm sure you can imagine if you've ever constructed things out of a number of circles, something that has to be sort of machine precise. This is super helpful, especially when you're doing like a robot or some sort of a mechanical construct of some sort. So that's basically it. That is how, here's just wrapping up that thing, that coin I guess you could say. So this trick I use whenever I'm trying to do circles, and we'll actually see it pop up in the actual piece that we're about to do. So here it is. The piece is called Experiments, Experiments. I did this for Halloween this year. Actually, I did a little bit late for Halloween this year, but nonetheless. I know some of you like seeing the early ideas and the early roughs. It's kind of cool because on this one, I didn't start any new files. I just kept it all in the same file at the beginning. So you get to see all of the ideas that I came up with initially and then sort of like grew to hate them in the middle of it and said, no, let's move on, or that's too stereotypical, or that's too obvious, or whatever. So here we had a skeleton with its jaw flying off a skull a second ago. Here we've got like a goofy looking vampire that thinks he's pretty special. And then I eventually throw in that he's holding up like a little tiny jack-o'-lantern. This was all just like, yeah, it'd be cool if he was holding something, but what should he be holding? I know, that's pretty Halloween. And just like in the middle of this, I'm like, oh god, this piece. You see I take it a little bit further, so I did the sort of super rough, and then I went into a slightly cleaner rough just so that I could really start figuring out if I wanted to do this thing. Sometimes, in fact, having lots of stages in the roughs is me trying to convince myself that I want to actually finish the piece. And it's like, oh, let's not commit yet, but let's just explore it a little bit further, which is a worthwhile way to have a process. But for this, it was actually more along the lines of me just saying, well, do I really want to do this? What are the ideas? And then obviously I ended up not doing it. Next we move into another vampire. And I was like, well, maybe not that. I'm not feeling that for whatever reason. So let's go into maybe a tighter headshot where he's like really goofy over the top and he's flying at you with his teeth and he's just, it's like, I don't know, goofiest vampire on the planet or some shit. And again, in the middle of doing it, I just thought, okay, there's some value here, but there's not enough value for me to keep working on it. So I eventually abandoned this one too. Here we're at the super rough stage, and here now we've just switched over to the more of a rough stage. And yeah, it's one of those things where going back and rewatching this video, now that I decided to not do this, I'm actually fairly happy, even though I think there's some cool stuff here. I don't really feel like drawing it. And if I don't feel like drawing it now, and I didn't feel like drawing it then, that means it's probably a good idea to not draw it. So at this point I started thinking, okay, let's get away from classic horror. Let's get away from vampires and skeletons. Let's go with something a little bit more fun and funny. Let's do like an alien. So now we're into the sort of sci-fi aspect that creeps into Halloween quite a bit. So here's like a goofy alien. He's got a big old brain. He's dressed up as a bartender for some reason, and then you can see that did not last very long at all. I killed that. I moved into like a skeleton. I wanted like a skeleton inside ectoplasm, and then I was like, nope, not that either, but I like that sci-fi thing. And now we have finally arrived at the idea of a mad scientist. So now you get to see me construct this mad scientist from scratch. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with him. I just knew that I wanted him to be like adjusting a glove or something. So in my initial rough, that's what he's doing. But then I thought, what can I do to make this guy kind of funny? Well, what if I had it so that like he was sort of trying to hide the fact that he had these like experiments done on him. So that's where this almost like monkey paw, werewolfy, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type hand comes from. And I add the little spurts on his neck, of spurts of fur. And then you can see I like went straight into doing some clean lines. That's because I was like really feeling it. I really liked where this was going, but I felt like the joke wasn't strong enough yet. There wasn't enough interesting things happening here. So as I was working on it, you know, you guys get to see this in a fairly quick time lapse where a couple of hours go into it, and then there's a lot of downtime of me just sort of thinking about it. And I realized, hey, you know what would actually be really fun is what if he experiments on himself, and he's just got like a ton of experiments going on, and some of them went badly, but he has to live with them because, you know, even though he's like an evil mad scientist, first and foremost he's a man of science. So he's having to test on himself because he needs to do these things to further the pursuit of, I don't know, answers and weird monkey hands and shit. I don't know. But the point is, this guy's had some mistakes and he has to live with them. And so we've got the sort of furry, clawy, monkey handy type thing. And then we've got, eventually we'll have like a metal eye patch thing that sort of like looks like it's screwed into his head, and then I put stitching to show that like maybe the right side of his face is sewn on in some way. and then we eventually stick like the bolt in his head that has lightning coming off of it, and then we throw that tail in the background, and then it's like, okay, cool, I think we've squeezed enough mistakes into this guy's life. So right now we're working on the mustache. Oh, sorry, actually I jumped over to the neck fur. So now we're onto the neck fur, which is kind of interesting in the interest of trying some things out and then seeing if you want to extrapolate it out further, whether you're doing like game development or you're doing a painting or you're doing this drawing or you're trying to figure out whether or not you're gonna, I don't know, do some landscaping. It's like have like a little test patch. This was a cool little test patch of hair so that I could figure out how I was going to handle the shadows, so that then when I got to his arm, I knew how I was going to handle the entire thing. So now we're putting in those screws into his weird like eye patch, eye cap thing that he's got going on, and he's got those stitches running on his side of his face. Now I'm working on the bolt. Now when I did this bolt, I thought that it was, I guess, like audacious enough, and then as the piece went on, I realized not only was it sort of creating a weird tangent with the top of his head, but it needed to be bigger. So later you'll see when I actually adjust the whole piece to start the coloring process, I enlarge that quite a bit to really make it a lot more prominent, so that it's more of a statement instead of just being like this sort of understated thing that's stuck into the top of his head. So now we're gonna get the other side of his mustache finished up. You can see sometimes what happens is, you know, it's got a super rough on it, and then you'll just see me do a quick bit of figuring out, and then I go in with like a cleaner line. This is actually something that I used to never really do, but as I'm getting more and more comfortable with Procreate, and it's actually converting me into even more of a digital artist than I'd ever been before, I sort of think of these pieces a little bit differently, and I think of solutions for certain areas a little bit differently. I guess you could think of it in the way that an artist might throw a post-it note over something that they want to change in their piece of art. It's sort of like that. And so I'll leave areas completely unthought out because I'll know I'll be able to figure it out later, and then you'll see like a little quick scribble go in to sort of finish solving it, and then I'll go back to doing the tighter lines. I think there's aspects of this drawing that could have fallen very easily into a category of something that I've done a lot before. I think that there's, you know, plenty of things in here I've drawn before, but then there were a couple of deliberate decisions I made to not fall into the same traps. I think that every artist sort of runs into that, where it's just like you're doing a certain haircut that's fairly common, and then you're like, oh well, I'll just do that the way I always do. The thing I really wanted to do on this one was sort of give him this like Fraser Crane kind of hair going on in the back. This sort of, I don't know, I find it kind of disgusting, but this sort of haircut where you've got maybe like this balding situation on top, and then it goes into this sort of like tightly curled mullet aspect in the back, but it's like curly and like, I don't know, there's something like really disconcerting about that to me, and I thought that it would fit this guy quite well. So that's sort of where this hair comes from. It's not something that I would normally do, and so I was like, okay, let's change it up, and it fits when you're doing like a sort of creepy, disgusting weirdo type guy. It's a good opportunity to do those types of weird things. Now we've moved on to the hand. You'll see that the other hand, the hand that ultimately is sort of like rubbing his palm, it's sort of one of those things like when your hand hurts and you're rubbing your hand, that doesn't come in until later, and it's really because I was envisioning them as pseudo-independent elements in this drawing, and I knew that I'd be able to get this one arm done, and since it's digital, if I could just finish off that arm, I could then pencil over the other hand. They're interacting, but one is sort of deliberately ignoring the other. It's like his crazy claw hand is it doesn't care what else is going on. I don't know, that's a really weird way to explain it, and then his other hand is coming in to interact with the sort of weird hand. So it's like this hand has to be existing where it is, doing what it's doing, before the other hand can even be a part of the piece. Now we're into the semi-tedious fur drawing. So I'm just gonna tap out for a second and let you guys enjoy some sweet, sweet tunes. Okay, and so now we get to where we're adding shadow into that fur, and we're trying to make it look like what's going on in the neck. So there's, you know, a lot of different ways that you can tackle something like this, especially if you know you're going to be taking it to colors. The question is always, do I actually build shadow into the lines, or do I save that for just the colors? I decided in order to create a high contrast fur, which sort of creates almost like a greasy looking fur, I thought it'd be good to have the harsh shadows in here. So by mimicking what I did on the neck, I did that test on the neck, and then I brought it down here, and it ends up working out pretty nicely. I don't know if anybody actually enjoyed the little musical interlude, but literally while I'm editing this video, I just got a push notification on YouTube of somebody saying that they enjoyed the background music. So to all the haters out there, I have one person supporting me, so I'm gonna call that good. Maybe we should feature the music more. Maybe do an all music where I just take that like one really repetitive loop and I just crank it up. So now we're on the hair, and we're actually giving it depth and trying to polish it up and make it look nice and clean. Well, as clean as this hair can look. Like I said, it's not a super flattering haircut. This part was actually kind of fun. Sometimes I find sections like this tedious, and so I have to do this mental trick with myself where I just commit to sitting down and taking the time and making this important. And so that's actually why I turned everything else off. I turned it all off so that I'm just not getting distracted by the stuff that's more fun to draw, and I just then focus on the hair by itself. And that actually helps for me. It really works. So at first, I couldn't even tell what was going on the screen. I think it was just a lot of really little tweaks. So sorry if I kind of went dead there for a second. It almost seemed like the video wasn't working. But that was, in fact, a lot of little things happening there. So now we move on to adding in the other arm. So you can see here that I diminish all the layers, lower the opacity, I mean, of all of them. And now I'm actually structuring in where that other arm would be. I didn't reference probably as hard as I should have the idea of a rubber glove. I did reference a little bit of what a rubber glove would look like, but that's what I'm going for here, that he's got that standard, you know, mad scientist rubber glove thing going on, and his crazy monkey paw werewolf thing hand is acting up, and so he's taking off the one rubber glove and sort of rubbing his crazy hand with his other hand, and so that's the deep backstory on this. Okay, now we get the thing ready for color, so we shrink it down a little bit to improve the composition a bit. You can see here that I'm going and putting the lightning coming off of his head bolt there, and then I go, okay, well cool, now we've got the space, let's throw that tail in the background. So he's got this lizard tail of some sort flying around in the background there. At this point, I'm starting to think about what I want to do with the colors, which I knew I wanted the whole thing to sort of look like an old-timey photo, but I didn't want to go so far as to just make the entire thing, you know, sepia or something. So I just wanted to stick in that really earthy palette for most of it. So that's why I throw this yellowy green in the background, this sort of brighter olive drab, I guess you could say. Olive not drab, I don't know. But you can see I'm just going in and flatting it though, as if it's just in a brightly lit room. That's sort of the goal, because I know that I'm going to use a lot of adjusting layers on top of this in order to get the exact look and tone and that vibe of the older photo. I know I'm going to get all of those through layers, so let's just leave everything as pure as possible. So at first I give him a slightly brighter skin tone, and then I slightly desaturate and darken it a little bit, just to sort of give him a little bit of an older look. And then we go with a more or less bright white. It's a little lower than bright white, but a bright white jacket. And then we give him a black glove. We color everything in. I mean, really, in some ways, we're coloring everything in the sort of logical color that you would expect it to be. You can see here I color in the bolt, and then I start coloring in the hair and all that, and that means that we're going to get close to where I adjust the bolt, because now I've revisited the bolt in his head, and that means I'm starting to think to myself like, ah shit, I should probably change that thing. If you've seen other videos, there's a lot of standard things going on here with like the blush on the nose, 5 o'clock shadow, darkness in the cheeks, darkness around his eye, and a little bit of highlighting on his forehead just to add a little bit of brightness up there. Now what I've done here is I've redrawn the bolt because after I sized it, it got blurry, and so I needed to redo it. Now it's reintegrated into the lines, it's the same color, it's set to multiply again. And so you can see this is all just very basically lit right now. I mean, it's not lit at all, it's just stark, raw colors. So I decided to throw in the background first, almost like he's against a backdrop for the photo. And now we're going in and we're doing the shadow. The shadow is a light reddish, light grayish reddish shadow set to multiply. And you can see I also deliberately kept the lines separate for the lightning coming off the bolt in his head so that I could colorize those and make them part of the lightning. Because if those were set to a brown multiply, it probably wouldn't work out as nicely as it does when you actually have it be the, because you want it to glow and you want it to look fancy. It's got to sort of look like the element that you're representing. So we're going in and just basically painting the shadows across the entire thing. I'm doing the select paint, select clear method, which is linked below, where I am moving up through the layers and I'm selecting the layer, painting, selecting the next layer and clearing, and then selecting it again and painting. If that sounds confusing, I recommend clicking on the link. That way I can explain it for you a little bit better. And now we are onto the hand, shadowing the hand. Some of the stuff that I know is coming at this point when I'm doing the shadowing is I know I'm going to have to start figuring out lighting around the lightning. I'm going to have to start figuring out how I'm going to blur it and get the exact glow effect that I'm going for. And I also just, you know, he's a fairly warm colored character against a warm background. How am I going to reconcile all of these things? So these are sort of the things I'm starting to process while I'm doing the shadow part. So a bunch of stuff is going to flip by super fast here for the lightning, and really what it is it's me filling the entire canvas blue, clearing it from the lightning layer, blurring it, and then clearing everything outside of the lightning. And what that does is it ends up creating a blur that's going inward. It's like creating an inward glow if you're familiar with layer effects in Photoshop. And then I'm like duplicating those to control how much of that is glowing there. And then the glow across his head, the lighting across his head, is me taking blue and going all across the entire form of his head, but then I'm selecting the shadows and erasing away from it. That way the blue light coming off of that lightning isn't in the shadows at all, essentially. So now that we've started layering on all these adjustment layers, you'll see me fiddling every now and then with colors, because of course the colors that I chose might not necessarily work out once all of this other stuff gets layered on top of it. And that's what you'll see pop up every now and then. All these other little things that are flashing by, I can't speak to every one of them because of the way Procreate captures, it goes by really quickly, but those are just me making decisions around something being too bright or something too dark or something too colorized, and I'm just basically turning layers up and down to try and tweak them. This is me creating a quick texture on the spot that I could overlay across the entire thing, and then it basically starts to wrap up right here. I do a little bit of a blur and a little bit of a clear at the end there. And that's just a way for me to sort of blur the edges. I blur the whole image and then I erase away just from where I want to be the focus. And that's how we get that look. So again, here's what the original lines look like that I put up online. If you'd like to color them, you can find them. I will put a link in the bottom to my DeviantArt page where you can download a profile or a PSD, whichever way you want to color. And again, there's the final version. So I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoy the channel, please consider liking the video or subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the World Wide Web, you can find me at these locations.